This is 1,000 grams of rock hard whole milk. This is what I use to conduct a lot of my experiments. And I've been getting a lot of questions whether or not rotating your food during the freeze drying cycle is beneficial or not. And so that's the experiment I'm going to conduct today. And so by using this, we can find out if that is beneficial or not to rotate your food. The nice thing about milk is that milk is consistent. It's going to be the same thing today, tomorrow, and next week. And so I have 4 of these trays of rock hard milk that's 1,000 grams, or you could say 1 kilo, or 1,000 milliliters, or 1 liter. And that's the nice thing about the metric system. The measurements are all consistent. So the thing I know about this milk is that right now it's 1,000 grams. And I know that when this is completed, this amount of milk is going to be 123 grams when it's dry. And the nice thing about it is that I know that this milk right here is going to be finished in the Harvest Right freeze dryer almost exactly 948 minutes from now, or about 16 hours. It's going to reach the internal extended dry time, or 24 hours for the external extra dry time. So it's very consistent on how it behaves in the Harvest Right freeze dryer. With all this being consistent, I will know and I'll be able to tell if rotating food is beneficial or not. So with all that being said, let the experiment begin.
So the way we're going to determine this is by this graph. Now this graph is taken from the log files of my freeze-dried milk. And the way we're going to determine this is pretty simple. This line right here is where the vacuum pump starts, and the line down here is where extra dry time begins. And the time between the two is where sublimation actually occurs during the freeze drying cycle. And the time from beginning to end for my 4 trays to go through sublimation and to be freeze dried is 948 minutes. And that is very consistent with my settings and with my altitude. So anything that can beat 948 minutes is going to be a plus. So to find out if rotating trays has any benefit, we need to beat this 948 minutes. So what we're going to do, we're going to find the center point between this, and that's going to be our point where we're going to rotate the trays. And this is going to be 474 minutes.
For the rotation, we're going to go ahead and open this up. We're going to take this tray out, rotate it 180 degrees, put that up here at the top, take this one down, rotate it, take the bottom one, rotate it, put it up here, take this one down here, just like so. Close the valve, turn the pump back on, and that's it.
We ended up rotating the tray halfway through the run, and our results from making that rotation halfway through is we were able to finish the batch in 896 minutes, which was just shy of 15 hours. And that resulted in saving 52 minutes after 1 rotation. Well, that's pretty good. That's almost saving 1 hour from just doing 1 rotation during the freeze-dry cycle. So the question is, if making 1 rotation saved 52 minutes, well, what would happen if we were to do, say, 2 rotations? Now with freeze-dried milk, I knew exactly when the halfway point was going to be with freeze-dried milk. Now, the problem is, most people do not know where their halfway point is going to be, so this is something that most people are going to have to estimate. And so with these other rotations, I just kind of guesstimated when I was going to make these other rotations. What would happen if I did 2 random rotations with freeze-dried milk? Well, here are the results. So I ended up rotating around 330 minutes here, and I made another rotation down here about 880 minutes. Well, after making 2 rotations here, that batch took 926 minutes. Well, that only gave me a 22-minute savings doing 2 rotations, which you think would be a little bit better, but it wasn't as good. Probably because one rotation was near the end point of the cycle, and the other rotation was only at the beginning of the cycle, and didn't give me, and wasn't as efficient as it could have been. Well, that's 2 rotations. What would happen if I did 3 rotations? Okay, so I did 3 rotations at this point at about 240 minutes, about 397 minutes, and down here about 680 minutes. At 3 rotations, it took me 851 minutes to freeze dry my milk, and that gave me 97 minutes savings for 3 rotations. Well, that's probably the best I had. Well, not to get too stingy, what would happen if I did 4 rotations? Well, I did 4 rotations, and that was 865 minutes, and that you think would be a little bit better, but that kind of regressed a little bit and only gave me 83 minutes at 4 rotations. And you can kind of see where my rotations were here, 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 and here. What I'm trying to get to is rotating your trays. There is a certain benefit. Doing 4 rotations is probably a little bit too much overkill, because you're pretty much going to be a ball and chain to your freeze dryer. Even 3 rotations is probably doing too much. I reached out to Harvest Right and asked what their opinion was about rotating the trays, and here's their reply. Harvest Right does not recommend stopping the process and shuffling trays. When you open your machine during the drying process and release the pressure, it indicates a catastrophic vacuum loss. We encourage adding more dry time to ensure the top and bottom tray complete the process without stopping the machine. Newer models have zone heating that reduces the variance between the top and bottom trays, resulting in a more consistent batch completion. Well, that's great for individuals who are buying a new machine, but for those individuals, such as myself, who have an older machine, well, we still have the problem with having a colder top and bottom tray. And if I understand, that amounts to about 500,000 machine owners that have this particular problem. So, getting back to the original issue about rotating your trays. The question comes back, should you or should you not rotate your trays? Well, when it comes to my own personal preference, I really do not rotate my trays if it's going to be a standard run. I usually end up putting 12 hours of extra dry time on my cycle, because that will take care of my freeze drying if it ends in the middle of the night or while I'm at work. So that takes care of itself. Now, the only time I really do rotate my trays, if I really load up my trays with a lot of material and I'm sure that I'm going to have some frozen spots somewhere in the middle of the trays, then I will rotate the trays if my trays are overloaded, which sometimes I will intentionally do. Then I do rotate my trays. But for the most part, I let the freeze drying program do what it's designed to do. So as far as rotating trays, it's kind of a personal preference on what you want to do. Harvest Right recommends you don't do it, but in some cases, I think it's necessary to do it under certain circumstances. So I'll leave it with that and let people make up their own decisions. So I hope this gives you a little bit more clarity as far as tray rotation. And maybe you've learned something a little bit new about this. So hopefully this doesn't cause more angst and doesn't raise more questions than it resolves. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for your time. Please subscribe, and as always, go forth and freeze dry the world.